You're at dinner, and someone says something you don't quite agree with. Nothing cruel. Nothing you'd call out if a stranger said it at another table. Just a little wrong. A little grating even. And for half a second, you open your mouth to say so. Then you don't. You say something smaller instead, something that sounds close enough to agreement that nobody at the table notices the substitution, including, most of the time, you. The conversation moves on, the wrongness sits there, quietly uncorrected, and you go back to your food like nothing happened. Something did happen, though. In that half second before you spoke, you ran a calculation. Not about whether you were right. About something else entirely. About what saying it might cost you with the person sitting across from you. This isn't a video about why you dislike conflict. Plenty of people dislike conflict and say the true thing anyway, uncomfortably, and move on. This is about something narrower and stranger. The moments where disagreement doesn't feel like discomfort you'd rather avoid. It feels like a threat to something you're not fully aware you're guarding. Your place, your position, the shape of what you are, specifically, to that person. Here's the part that's easy to miss. The behavior doesn't start with the conflict. It starts before the conflict, or at the very first flicker of one, with a kind of silent audit. What happens to my standing here if I say this? Does this person still see me the same way, want me around the same amount, trust me with the same closeness if I push back? And depending on the answer that audit returns, the words that actually leave your mouth may already have been edited by the time you hear yourself say them. Notice that this isn't the same thing as reading someone's face for signs they're upset, or replaying a text to check whether their tone shifted. That's a different behavior, watching someone else for evidence that something might already be wrong. This is watching yourself, adjusting your own behavior in real time to keep something from shifting in the first place. One is surveillance pointed outward, toward them. This is something closer to governance pointed inward, over what you're willing to say and when and how much of it survives the trip from thought to speech. It's worth asking why the stakes feel as high as they do when so often the actual disagreement is small. Part of it may be that a relationship isn't really one thing, it's more like an ongoing, unspoken agreement about how two people are allowed to treat each other, what can be said, what's expected to stay unsaid, how much either person can ask of the other without it counting as too much. Disagreement doesn't just risk the specific point being argued, it risks reopening that whole unspoken agreement for renegotiation. And renegotiation is inherently uncertain. There's no guarantee the terms come back the same, or that you come back with the same place in them you had going in. Seen that way, protecting your place isn't an overreaction to a small disagreement. It's a reasonable response to a genuinely uncertain process. Even when the disagreement itself is genuinely small, it can happen slowly, spread out over a whole conversation, a gradual softening you'd never notice in the moment. Or it can happen in a single instant, a sentence that gets rerouted mid-breath, so smoothly that even you might describe it, if asked, as simply changing your mind. For some people, there can be a physical dimension to it, though it isn't universal and isn't a reliable marker on its own. A brief tightening somewhere behind the sternum, right as the truer sentence starts to form. A half second of stillness where the face holds its expression a beat too long. A pause before the smaller sentence arrives, so brief it barely registers as a pause at all. None of this is a signature you can rely on to catch the mechanism in the act. Some people report noticing something like this, others report noticing nothing at all, and the sensation when it happens doesn't arrive labeled with what it means. There's an old fable, sometimes attributed to Aesop, about a storm that moves through a valley. A great oak stands at the center of a field, proud of its size, its roots driven deep into the ground. Nearby, a stand of reeds grows along the riverbank, thin, unremarkable, bending in whatever direction the wind happens to push them. When the storm rises, the reeds bend low and let it pass over them, one after another, in a long, unbroken wave. The oak, refusing to bend, holds its shape against the full weight of the wind, until the wind simply tears it out of the ground, roots and all, and leaves it lying across the field. The moral usually offered is simple: bend, and you survive; resist, and you break. It's a tidy story about flexibility, the kind you might hear told as encouragement to compromise, to pick your battles, to not die on every hill. The usual moral admires exactly that flexibility. The reed survives because it yields. But sit with it a little longer, and the admiration gets less comfortable to extend. The reed gives up its shape the instant something bigger pushes against it. It never finds out what would happen if it stood its ground, because it never tries. It only knows the version of events where it bends first and asks nothing afterward. That's closer to what's actually happening at the dinner table, or in the group chat, or across the desk from someone whose opinion of you matters more than you'd like to admit. It's not that you've decided honesty isn't worth pursuing in general as a rule, it's that some part of you has already run the reed's calculation for this specific relationship. Bend now, keep the place you have, don't find out what the alternative costs without ever consciously agreeing that's the trade being made on your behalf. The philosopher Aristotle spent real attention on a version of this question in his writing on character and virtue. He was interested in the space between two failures of how people conduct themselves with each other socially. On one end, there's the person who agrees with nothing, resists everything, and makes themselves difficult to be around, a kind of chronic friction that costs them relationships in its own way. On the other end, there's a figure he treats far less kindly than modern instinct might expect. Someone devoted almost entirely to being pleasant. Someone who tells people what they want to hear, who resists nothing, who calibrates every response toward smoothness. Aristotle doesn't describe that person as warm or generous. He splits the type according to whether anything is being sought: the obsequious person who wants nothing beyond being pleasant, and the flatterer who is pleasant in pursuit of advantage. Aristotle has money and what money buys in mind. Neither of those is quite the thing this video is about. What we're describing here, pleasantness in the service of holding a position with someone, isn't a category Aristotle sets out, and it would be a stretch to say he had it in view. What his distinction does offer is a frame worth borrowing, that pleasantness can be aimless, or it can be pursuing something, and those are not the same behavior even when they look identical. The healthy middle ground between the two failures, he says, is genuinely laudable. He just never gives it a name. The closest he comes is to say it most resembles friendship. He draws a related distinction elsewhere when he separates friendships built on usefulness, friendships built on pleasure, and the rarer kind built on something closer to mutual regard for who the other person actually is. The first two kinds, he suggests, can dissolve when the usefulness or pleasure they depend on disappears, because what was actually being maintained was never really about the other person as a specific individual, but about what continuing to be near them provided. That much is his own analysis. Push that thought beyond where Aristotle takes it, though, and you arrive somewhere he never goes, that some of what looks like closeness is really maintenance of supply. You're not managing a relationship with this specific person so much as managing access to whatever role they currently play in your life. And disagreement is one of the few things that can put that access at visible risk. That distinction matters because it's easy to confuse this mechanism with ordinary tact, and they are not the same thing, even though they can look identical from the outside. Tact is choosing your words carefully because you care how the other person receives them. It's other-directed, aimed at their comfort, their dignity, the relationship as a shared thing. This is choosing your words carefully because you're not sure your place with them can survive the honest version. It's protective of you, of your position, even when it arrives dressed up as consideration for them. The two can be genuinely hard to tell apart in the moment, and most people never bother trying because both produce the same visible behavior: silence, softening, a smaller sentence than the one you started with. The two won't always be easy to separate from the inside, and it's worth being skeptical of any tidy test for telling them apart. A felt sense of unease right before you soften, something doesn't reliably prove which one is happening. Plenty of ordinary tact carries its own small discomfort, and plenty of position protecting can happen without any noticeable feeling at all. What a moment like that can do is prompt a question, not answer one. Was the softening aimed at them or at keeping something about your place with them undisturbed? The honest answer isn't always available in the moment. Sometimes it only becomes visible later, if it becomes visible at all. Once you start looking for the difference, though, the pattern shows up in places that don't resemble a dinner table at all. It's in the group chat where you type out a real objection, read it back, and delete it in favor of something softer, because the group has an established shape, an unspoken set of roles, and you're not sure your objection fits inside it without changing how you're seen there. It's in the meeting where you watch a decision go through that you privately think is a mistake and say nothing because the person who made the call has some say in how the next year goes for you. And being right about the decision matters less than staying in good standing with the person who made it. It's in the family gathering where a comment lands badly and, instead of naming it, you laugh along because naming it out loud in front of everyone would force a question you'd rather not have answered. Exactly how secure is your place at that table, really, once it's tested? It's in romantic relationships too, where the stakes can feel especially high. You let a pattern repeat 3, 4, 5 times before you say anything, not because it stopped bothering you, but because each unspoken instance felt like a smaller risk than the conversation that would finally name it. The relationship, as it currently stands, feels survivable. The relationship after the conversation is an unknown quantity, and unknown quantities are exactly what this mechanism is built to avoid. And it's in the friendships that have simply run the longest, where the pattern may be especially hard to notice simply because it's had so much time to settle in. Think of someone you've known for a decade, someone whose opinions on certain subjects you've simply stopped testing your own opinions against, not because you agree with them, but because disagreeing feels like it would require reopening something that's been comfortably settled for years. You've bet so many times on that particular subject that you may no longer have quick access to what you'd actually say if the cost of saying it disappeared. The place you're protecting there isn't dramatic or urgent, it's just old and familiar, and it's been quietly reshaped by every small accommodation you've made to keep it exactly as it's always been. Here's what makes the mechanism so quiet in daily life. It rarely announces itself as fear. It usually just feels like a preference. You tell yourself you're being easygoing, low maintenance, someone who doesn't make a big deal out of small things. Sometimes that's exactly true. Plenty of disagreements genuinely aren't worth having, and choosing not to have them is just good judgment, not self-protection in disguise. But sometimes the preference is downstream of the calculation instead of upstream of it. You didn't weigh the objection, decide it wasn't worth raising, and then feel calm about the decision. You felt the risk to your position first, fast and beneath conscious notice, and the sense that it wasn't worth it arrived afterward, already convenient, already sounding like something you chose freely. It's worth asking, honestly, what exactly is being protected when this happens? It's rarely as simple as being liked. It's closer to something like continuity, the sense that whatever this relationship currently is, whatever unspoken agreement governs how the two of you get along, will keep being that unchanged if you don't introduce anything that might force a renegotiation of the terms. Disagreement seen this way isn't threatening because the other person might get angry. It's threatening because it might reveal that the relationship was never as settled as it felt, that its terms were always open to revision, and you genuinely don't know what you'd be renegotiated into if the question ever actually got asked. That's a heavier thing to be protecting than most people would admit to protecting. And it's worth being honest about what the protection actually costs, not in general, but inside this one relationship specifically. Every time you bend instead of speaking, two things happen at once, quietly. First, you don't find out whether your place there was ever actually at risk. In the first place, the disagreement never happens, so the question of what it would have cost you never gets answered, only avoided. Second, the other person is left working from incomplete information, not about who you are in some broad sense, but about what's actually sayable inside this specific relationship. What can be pushed against without consequence, where the real edges of the agreement between you sit. They may believe those edges are wider or narrower than they actually are, simply because you've never tested them where they could see it. Neither of you ends up knowing where the real boundary is. You each only know where you've assumed it to be, and the assumption goes untested for as long as the bending continues. Play it forward inside one specific relationship, and the shape of the cost gets clearer. Say there's a particular subject, how a shared responsibility gets divided, how a certain kind of comment lands, what one of you expects from the other in a specific situation that comes up again and again, and each time it does, you give the smaller answer instead of the real one. From where you're standing, you're managing a live tension carefully, storm by storm. From where the other person is standing, there may be no tension there at all. As far as they know, the subject was settled a long time ago on the terms your smaller answers kept confirming. So if the real answer ever does surface, and sometimes it doesn't land as a difference of opinion. It lands as a surprise, sometimes as a small betrayal, because they were never given the information that would have let them see it coming. The cost, in other words, isn't just what it does to you. It's that the other person has been quietly deprived of an accurate map of one relationship, this one, while believing, reasonably, that the map they had was current. Go back to the oak and the reed one more time, because the fable leaves something out that's worth adding back in. The reed doesn't just survive the one storm the story tells you about. It survives every storm the same way, bending at the very first sign of wind, well before anyone, including the reed, could say how strong that wind was actually going to get, which means it never finds out which storms would have genuinely required bending and which ones it might have stood through untouched. It bends before the test arrives every time, so the test itself never actually happens. The oak's failure is dramatic and visible. It ends up on the ground, roots exposed for the whole field to see. The reed never fails in any way anyone can see. It just keeps standing there, technically upright, year after storm after year, having never once found out what it could actually have withstood. None of this means the bending was wrong exactly, or that the reed should have tried to be an oak. Sometimes the calculation may be perfectly reasonable. The relationship may genuinely matter more than the point you gave up to keep it intact. The trouble isn't any single instance, it's that the calculation can run so quickly, so far beneath anything you'd call a decision, that you can go years without ever finding out whether it's still calculating correctly, whether the place you've been so carefully protecting still needs protecting in the way it once did, or whether you're bending for a storm that by now might not even still be blowing. Maybe that's the more honest question to sit with the next time you feel a sentence shrink on its way out of your mouth. Not "was I right?" Not even "was it worth the conflict?" Just this: what exactly did some part of you think would happen to your place here if you hadn't bent, and how long has it actually been since you found out?